dependence of simultaneous changes of volume of left ventricle in compared to its pressure. The pressure of blood in the left ventricle. That's pressure volume curve. How it's changing in left ventricle throughout the cardiac cycle at the phase of its contraction and relaxation. That's more interesting here on the desk. So that's pressure volume curve, which you should be able to analyze. Second type of illustration of cardiac cycle is the dynamic of the pressure which we measure in millimeters of the mercury in three important cameras of the heart and three important areas. That's aorta, left ventricle, and left atrium. We show here three values of the pressure: 120, 80, and 0 on this axis. And this is the time axis. It would be showing us time process of cardiac cycle. So, on this graph we will show three lines which will illustrate us cycle changes of the pressure in three areas: aorta, left ventricle, and left atrium. So, we take some point when we begin our graph. This beginning point, let's take the time, the beginning of the phase of systole of the atrium, of the ventricles. That would be the beginning point of systole of the ventricles. So now the question, what pressure is in the left ventricle before its contraction? At the end of diastolic period, what's the pressure in the left ventricle? Which pressure would be at the end of diastolic period? Ventricles are relaxed, still relaxed, end of diastolic period. They contain which amount of blood? Large or small amount? At the end of diastolic period, why small amount? Large amount or small amount? Which amount of blood would be left? Huh? Before starting contraction. Before they start the contraction, they contain large amount of fluid, large amount of blood, because they have some portion of blood which they should push into the arteries in the aorta, left ventricle. So they contain large amount of blood. And on the curve, pressure volume, here is the volume, here is the pressure. 120, 80. On the volume, we have two values. 120 milliliters and 70 milliliters. So what would be the point on this graph? Here is millimeters of mercury, also 120, 80. So which point would be characterizing us the pressure and volume of left ventricle at the end point of diastolic period? 70 here. Small amount of blood. Ventricle should have some blood to throw, to push up, to push out. But you're telling 70. Low amount of blood. Nothing to throw up. This 70, that's end systolic volume. This volume would be staying always in heart. As far as heart would be empty, it would contain some amount of blood. It would be 70 milliliters. It would be at the end of systolic phase. 70. It will stay always in the heart. So at the end of diastolic period, it contains 120 milliliters. It contains more blood. This additional portion of blood which would be pushed out. So that's end diastolic volume here. End diastolic volume to end of the phase of diastole. Left ventricle contains this amount of blood here. So now second question, what's the pressure of this blood in left ventricle at the end of diastole? 80 millimeters of mercury. Where from? 80? This is high pressure, 80 millimeters, that's high pressure. Where from? They are relaxed. Ventricles are relaxed. Which pressure may be in ventricles if they are relaxed? Where from? 70? To have 70, we should contract our muscle. We should constrict the muscle. Huh? To have 70 millimeters of mercury, we should press, we should constrict the muscle. Heart should be constricted, contracted to have 70 millimeters. So what's the pressure at the end of diastole in the muscle? 0. 0 millimeters of mercury. 0. There is no pressure at all because they are relaxed. They are passive, left ventricle. That's not exactly 0, that's slightly positive. But due, not to contraction, but due to special line which we draw here and we show by this line. We show the change of the pressure if we passively stretch left ventricle, because left ventricle has some elastic force while filling with larger amount of fluid. We will stretch the walls of the left ventricle, and they will, due to the stretching, they will be passively pressing on the fluid. But this would be low pressure, around 5-7 millimeters of mercury positive. So that's passive stretching pressure force, which is due to passive stretching of the left ventricle. Generally, it's near 0. The pressure in left ventricle near 0. So this point is here, starting systole, and diastole is here. This point on this graph, that's here, and here, that's systolic beginning, that's somewhere here, slightly positive pressure in left ventricle. This point, that's here. What's the pressure in the aorta at this point of time? What's the pressure in the aorta?
120.
What's the pressure?
75.
In the aorta, which was stretched by the portion of blood, which is the blood from the aorta during diastolic period of the heart, flows only into the peripheral vessels, into the periphery. Blood's flowing slowly into the periphery. Thus, pressure in the aorta slowly decreasing, gradually decreasing during diastole of the heart. That's diastolic pressure in the aorta. That's 80 millimeters of mercury. 80, where from? Because aorta was stretched. That's elastic vessel aorta. It's been stretched, and elasticity pushes the blood. So that's 80 millimeters of mercury. This is the pressure, and gradually decreasing these 80 millimeters because blood flows into the peripheral vessels, then through the veins back to the heart. So that's 80 millimeters in the aorta. These are two start points of two curves, aorta and left ventricle pressure. Then last graph we will draw later, and the left atria we will show later, the graph for left atria. So now these two. What happens if ventricles contract? Start points of their contraction. Pressure in the ventricles receives excitation through atrioventricular node and excites and then contract. Left ventricle contract. Pressure in left ventricle goes up, increases. Pressure increases due to left ventricle contraction. What happens? Blood through the opened valve, this valve was opened, right? Because there was filling phase from atria to ventricles, blood flowed earlier. So pressure rises and backflow of blood streams from ventricles to atria. This backflow closes this valve. As far as the pressure rises to low values, it becomes to low values higher than in atria. This backflow closes the valve. Atrioventricular valve closes. This closure of atrioventricular valve we show here, and we hear this closure as the first sound of heart. First sound of heart being caused by closure of atrioventricular valve. Pressure of left ventricle rises, increases. Keep in mind that at this time point, pressure in left ventricle was 0. In the aorta, it was 80. This valve was closed by outer pressure from aorta. It was closed. So that means that during this phase, this is the first phase of systole. All valves in heart closed. That means that during this phase, no blood flows from the heart. Neither no blood flows into the heart. So, volume of left ventricle being constant during this phase, optimal pressure increases. So, pressure increases, but volume on this axis being constant. This curve, first phase, is here. So, that's first phase of systole period of ventricles. The same curves there, here. Here, closure of the valve, first tone. Here. So then, as far as the pressure in the left ventricle being the same as in the aorta, from internal space, from ventricle, pressure being higher than in the aorta, opens the valve of aorta, opens this valve from internal space, it's open, and if the pressure in the ventricle being even higher than in the aorta, blood begins to flow from the ventricle into the aorta. That means that pressure in the ventricle being increased further, pressure in the aorta being also increased because of due to the cardiac output, due to cardiac contraction. In the aorta also increases the pressure. Here, opening of aortic valve. So that's second phase of systolic period. That's phase when blood flows into the aorta from the ventricle. This phase, second phase, may be shown on that diagram, like even further increase of the pressure being increased even more, and volume of the left ventricle being decreased, because blood flows into the aorta and volume of the left ventricle should be decreased. So this graph should go in these two directions, and it's doing that to this point. This graph goes to this point. So that's second phase of this graph. Here, this phase. Then, what happens there? Then, left ventricle finishes its contracted to its maximal extent, which is always depending if all fibers, as far as all fibers involved in this contraction, this amount of contraction, this force of contraction is depending on the amount of calcium in myocardial cells. It's contracted to its maximal extent, and then it has nothing to do but only to relax. And pressure in the left ventricle drops again up to 0. It drops down. The pressure in the left ventricle, as far as ventricle reached their maximal point of pressure, pressure in ventricles drops down. As far as pressure in the left ventricle drops and becomes lower than in the aorta. Aorta is elastic vessel, it's being stretched by cardiac output. This elastic force pushes the blood back and presses the blood in both directions into the vessels, peripheral arteries, and back into the heart. And first portion of blood enters as backflow into the heart. And this first portion flowing into the heart back closes aortic valve. This closure of aortic valve happens after first period, short period, fast decrease in the pressure in the aorta. This fast decrease of the pressure caused by some low amount of blood which enters back into the heart. This fast decrease of the pressure in the aorta then is prevented by closure of the valve, and there we have some stabilization of the pressure after such incision. So this incision is the point of the closure of aortic valve. That's closure of aortic valve it shows us end of systolic period. We call this second sound of heart. It's point when systole period finishes and we have diastolic beginning. Diastole beginning. So that's why we call first sound like systolic sound and second sound like diastolic sounds of the heart. So systole consists from two phases. That's phase first we discuss, then second phase when blood flows. End of the systolic period, closure of aortic valve. Closure of aortic valve here. Second sound of heart. Here. At this point on this graph. At this point. Second sound. So what happens then? Then pressure in the left ventricle decreases up to 0 without any changes of the volume. Because all valves are closed. This already closed, atrioventicular still closed. So this phase, first phase of diastole, phase of relaxation, is characterized by closure of all valves. All valves are closed and pressure decreases without any changes of the volume of the left ventricle. That means this third phase would be drop down the pressure without pressure drops down up to 0 without any changes in volume. Volume being constant, and this volume at the end of systolic period we call, which stays in the ventricles, we call end systolic volume. It's always been constant. It's always been presented in left ventricle. It's always staying in left ventricle. Left ventricles, they can't empty totally. They have always some amount of blood staying in them after the contraction. That's end systolic volume of blood in left ventricle. This third phase here. Then, as far as the pressure in left ventricle drops down, becomes 0, arteries, they have some amount of blood. That's the question where from. Important question, we will discuss it later. Where from the arteries collected the blood during ventricle contraction. There is some portion of blood in the arteries, and ventricles, they have 0 the pressure, in arteries higher pressure, so the pressure from arteries presses on the valves, atrioventricular valves, and opens atrioventricular valves. Atrioventricular valves being opened, opening of the valve, that's not noisy process, we can't hear this process. We may only close the door loudly. So the same with the valve, we can only hear the closure of the valve, but never we can hear the opening of the valve. So that's here, and then second phase of the diastolic period, that's filling phase. Blood begins to flow from arteries into the ventricles, filling the ventricles, increasing the volume of left ventricle, increasing the volume, but without any changes of the pressure. Pressure would be slightly increasing only due to this passive stretching force, passive stretching pressure of the elastic walls of the heart on the amount of the blood. So it would be slightly positive, but without any additional contraction. That's the relaxation phase. That's diastolic period. That's diastolic period of heart, and it will be finished by contraction, next contraction, when closure first sound, increase of the pressure in the aorta. After this incision and decrotic wave, we call this stabilization of the pressure decrotic wave. The pressure begins to slowly decrease due to outflow to peripheral vessels, and then again all the same cardiac cycle. Let's cycle. So all the phases would be again repeated. So next cycle. That's cardiac cycle. Again, this fourth phase. This again. First, second, third, and again fourth. So that's cardiac cycle. It's written in your Tekalon Atlas. explained there. So if something unclear, then read the book, it's written there. You should be able to explain this picture. You should be able to draw this picture by yourself. Because especially this picture underlies next lesson. You should be able to explain all the stages of this picture. Because next lesson we should speak about the regulation of cardiac activity, and we should speak how heart muscle or muscle of the heart may be adapting to increases, to changes of its activity. How it may be adapting to increase of resistance in large arteries. If pressure in large arteries increases, heart muscle should be able to press against this increased resistance. So it should contract more. And we will draw this graph, how it will be changed in this situation, how it will be adapted to this situation. So you should be able to explain, to know this curve excellently. Because these changes, if we have increased post-loads, that's resistance in large arteries, that's the pressure in large arteries, peripheral resistance. If preload of heart increases, that's the volume of venous blood. All these changes, now you should be able to explain, because all these changes you would be using to explain properties and features of adaptation in patients. In patients who suffer from arterial hypertonia, heart changed its activity based on this process, which we explain next lesson. In the patients with cardiac insufficiency, you will have such patients in your life, in your clinical life. You will observe them, because cardiac vascular pathology, it's mostly widely spread pathology in patients, in all peoples throughout the world. So you will meet such patients, nevertheless you will be specialists of any other specializations, you will see such patients. And you should be able to cure them, you should be able to analyze their individual types of pathology, their individual ways of adaptation of the heart. Because we should stimulate those functions of heart which are functioning. And next lesson we will discuss how the heart would be adapting, so it would allow you in the future to discuss in pathology, under the case of pathology, how heart may be adapting to different types of cardiovascular changes. Some of them may be of pathological, the others of normal types of regulation. So that's today we discuss all the basis. Next lesson we'll discuss how it may be changed and which rules we may use to explain cardiac regulation, cardiac adaptation to different situations of the function of the heart together with vessels, with circulation of the blood. So, we have only one question now to explain more. That's the pressure in the left atriums. In the left atrium. The pressure in the left atrium. What's the pressure in the left atrium? How would be changed pressure in the left atrium? What's your opinion? How to show here pressure in left atrium? Pressure in left atrium contracts just before the ventricles. If cardiac cycle, how to measure duration of cardiac cycle? We should divide 60 seconds on the number of cardiac contractions per minute. If we take normally heart, in average, we take an average 75 per minute, duration of cardiac cycle would be 60 seconds divided by 75. It would be 0.8 seconds. So you should keep in mind only two values. 875 per minute, that's in average as the basement, taking normal frequency. Then you may calculate, dividing 60 per 75, duration of each cardiac cycle, 0.8. Then you have to remember second value, that systolic period takes 0.33 seconds. Systole takes 330 milliseconds. That's 0.33 seconds. And if you take this in mind, then 0.8 minus 0.33, you may calculate what's the duration of diastole period. 0.47. Yeah. You don't need to remember all other values of different subphases duration, because they will be changed totally if cardiac frequency increases. Heart frequency. If heart frequency increases, that means the duration of the whole cycle would be decreased or increased. If frequency becomes, for example, 120. We have physical exercise, we measure our pulse frequency, it's 120. So what's with cardiac cycle? Is it decreased or increased in its duration? Increased. Only one told and decreased. If frequency 75 per minute in 1 minute, duration of cardiac cycle 0.8 seconds. If frequency 120 in 1 minute, what would be the duration of cardiac cycle? 2 seconds. Why 2 seconds? In 1 minute, in 60 seconds, 120 strokes. So we divide 60 seconds to 120. That's 0.5 seconds. You see that here, heart should systole and diastole period is shorter time, in shorter period of time, in 0.5 seconds. It should work faster. So cardiac cycle will be decreased in its duration. Then, next, systole takes 0.33 seconds, diastole 0.47. During this period, it's 75 per minute. If we have increase in frequency, we have shortening of cardiac cycle. How would change? That's 0.8, 0.4, that would be like this. 0.5, like this. So which phase would be shortened of cardiac cycle? Diastolic. Shortened would be only diastolic period. That's very important. The systolic period can't be shortened because it's fast enough, it's maximally fast to throw away the blood. Blood can't leave the ventricles immediately. That's fluid. If you will take some vessel and you want to push out the water from this vessel, you may press the walls of this vessel, but then even you will reach maximal speed, maximal outflow of the fluid from this vessel. And you can't increase even faster this outflow. You can't. Even if you will be pressing with additional force, you will reach some maximum limit of this outflow of the fluid from the vessel. Heart, by its all contractions, nevertheless, in normal or in intensified conditions, it's always pressing almost at the fastest rate and pushes out the blood from the ventricle almost at its fastest conditions. So, systolic period may be shortened only slightly up to 0.3, not lesser than 0.3. So, 0.3, that's like this. It can't be shortened more than 0.3 seconds. That means the diastolic period would be shortened. Diastolic period is shortening. There are two follows from that. First, that maximal rate of our heart, how fast? We can't have faster heart rate than which values? In average. 100? 200. Around 180. Around 180, that's maximum rate of our 200. That's around 180, 200. That's maximum rate of our heart. You will study that child's they have faster heart rate than we. Small animals, rats, birds, they have around 200, 300 as normal heart rate, because they have small heart. Child, they have sympathotonic increase of sympathetic nervous system. First and second, they have small heart. They may push out the blood faster than from our ventricle, large ventricle. So that's allowing them, as well as to the small animals who also have smaller heart, to have a faster heart rate, because they have faster systolic period, faster than 0.3 seconds than we. And second follows from that is that diastolic period, if it's being shortened, may be not sufficient enough for two main reasons of diastolic period. First main reason, first main process in diastolic period is filling of blood, of ventricles by blood. Filling of ventricles by blood happens during diastolic period. So diastolic period should be long enough to allow portions of blood, some amount of blood to fill the ventricles. If we have shortened diastolic period, filling phase, decreasing suffering. We can't fill amount of blood into the ventricles, so cardiac output would be decreased. Second importance of diastolic period is that during diastolic period, heart receives oxygen and nutrients. All our organs, except the heart, are supplied by blood due to cardiac increase of the pressure, systolic pressure, that's cardiac systole. All organs have this peak increase of the pressure, which is pushing the blood through the vessels. So all other organs supplied by blood due to systole of the heart, during systole of the heart. But the heart itself, it can't be supplied by blood during systole. Why? Because coronary vessels which are supplying the heart, they've been pressed during systole of the heart. They've been pressed and closes their permeability for blood. So cardiac heart receives the blood only when coronary vessels are opened, relaxed, muscle open the vessels, and these vessels are permeable for fluid, for blood, thus supplying cardiac muscle with instant oxygen. That means that cardiac muscle supplied by blood only during diastolic period. So if diastolic period shortens, then blood supply for heart, oxygen supply, nutrient supply for heart decreases, and that's second follow of decreased diastolic period during increases of heart frequencies, of heart rate. So we can't live for a long time with increased heart frequency. We should have decrease of heart frequency, thus enabling to restore the function of the heart. Different persons who are adapted to physical exercise and those who are not adapted, they react to physical exercise differently. All of us, we should increase heart minute blood volume to increase the blood supply of the muscles. We should increase minute blood volume. It's consisted from two values, heart frequency and heart amplitude, portion of blood. Efficacy of each contraction, cardiac stroke, it may be increased, and this allows us to be adapt without any increase of frequency. That's better way of adaptation, that's good way of adaptation, because it enables us to increase amplitude of contraction without increase of frequency. Thus, heart never suffers from blood insufficiency because diastolic period long enough. Another way of adaptation of persons who never been adapted to physical exercise, to increase frequency of cardiac contractions. In that case, heart increases the frequency, while increasing the frequency shortens cardiac cycle, shortens diastolic period. That's not a good way for adaptation. We may see this way of adaptation in those who not adapted to physical exercise, in those persons who not adapted. Один вопрос и я пойду. Чего ты хочешь? Я отпущу сам, уже конец занятий скоро.
Я хотел сказать то, что, может быть, соли